want to open up the floor to everybody just by starting and asking, what is self-care to you? How do you all define self-care?
I see.
Taking a walk to, I say taking a walk to clear my mind.
Watching, I like looking at comedy. It helps me with any stresses that I may have. Laughter to me is the key to happiness and letting go of stress.
Mm-hmm.
I would say finding time for my loved ones, finding time to build up my relationships, getting in contact with people that I've missed, because we still can't see some people in our lives, but just keeping in contact with them, that for me just is the most precious thing.
Mm-hmm.
But most of all, prayer. I need it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? And I'm gonna try to look at the chat at the same time.
Bubble baths.
Bubble baths. Okay, and then someone in the chat had a really good answer. So Monique said, doing things that bring me peace, saying things to myself that bring me peace. So I think that's a great answer. So based on, the things you all said today, and usually when I ask this question, that's typically the answers I'll get. So a lot of people will talk about things they do for themselves. So someone said bubble baths. We had someone else say prayer, watching comedy. Laughter is a really good form of self-care. But the theme that I tend to find, just as with these answers, and it's not that any of those answers are bad or anything like that. Of course, we want to doing things for others. I like that one too. But I find that a lot of times when we think about self-care, when we define self-care, our answers a lot of times are reactive and not proactive. And so when I say reactive, it's a lot of, I had a long day, so I might drink a glass of wine, or I might light a candle, or I'll take a bubble bath, or I'll write in my journal, or whatever it is, or pray, whatever it is that works for you. But as I said, a lot of times I find that it's reactive. So people are doing these things kind of after the fact, or it's like a lot of times some people almost do it as if they are rewarding themselves after going through like these hard times. And although there's, again, nothing wrong with that, I want you all to think about this. And let me start by saying I'm a very interactive speaker. So I do like, people to participate. I ask a lot of questions, y'all will see. But I want to ask you all, what are some ways we can be more proactive in our self-care rather than reactive?
Saying no and setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Setting boundaries, that's a big one. Can we think of any others?
Would eating healthier be considered like drinking more water?
Mm-hmm.
Waking up and praying before your long day.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, I mean, these are all great answers. So I want to touch on each one. So the first, well, I'll say boundaries for last because boundaries is a big one. But let's start with, someone said praying when you start your day, right? So how many of you all have a morning routine, something that you do every morning?
Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm. Anybody want to share a little bit about their morning routine?
I know when I get up, the same as I get up and I pray.
Mm-hmm.
Also read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Some scriptures there before I start. And then I listen to Get Up Mornings with Erica, which is a gospel station. I'm more into, praising God and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I get ready to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry, y'all. I have a 60-pound dog. Let me go put her up right quick.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I sent her to daycare earlier, so I thought that would make her like calm down and go to sleep, but I guess not. So yeah, so morning routines.
Yeah. I also
So
left out that I do yoga as well.
yes.
Me through the day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody else do morning yoga?
I lift weights in the morning
Okay.
twice a week.
Woohoo!
That's
I
good.
raised some with my students. We really love to do, well, my kids are District 75 students, and we have this routine in which we do chair yoga. So I don't just do it on my own, but we do it together. That's part of kind of like our morning routine. But if I were to say mine, I guess I would wake up in the morning, of course, pray, kiss my husband to see if he's alive, but mostly because, I'm grateful to have another day with him. Text my mother, my normal shower and, the routine, but mostly look in the mirror and give myself 5 affirmations, 5 positive affirmations of like, you can do it. You've got today. God is with you. Whatever it is that comes to my mind, just to remind myself that I am not alone and I can't do things.
Yes, I'm loving it. I love these answers. Like everybody's taking care of themselves and working out is coming up in prayer and affirmations. I love it. So
We have Monique. She said that scheduling self-care routines ahead of time. And then we have Noelle, Luis, making self-care more of a routine, fitting it in activities we love to do daily.
okay. And thank you for monitoring the chat. I'm on an iPad, so it's hard to see both at one time. Yeah, so morning routines are important, right? So the way you start your day, and you can disagree with me, but the way you start your day is going to determine how that day is going to go. And just that's just the way it is. About a year ago, I remember I came across this post that said, people who, if you start your day by snoozing your alarm, snoozing is a form of procrastination. So if you snooze your alarm and that's the way you're starting your day, you've already set this tone for the day, right? This tone of like procrastination, this tone of kind of like, oh, I'll do it later, I'll worry about it later. And that feeling is going to stick with you for the remainder of the day. And so I listened to a podcast by a guy named Hal Elrod. It's a white man. I wish I could give you a podcast by a black woman, but I found that this one thing in his podcast was really helpful. So this particular guy, he wrote a book called The Miracle Morning. And what he did was he studied the habits of like really successful millionaires and people who are entrepreneurs and CEOs of all these businesses and stuff. And he found that the commonality among them all was that they all had a morning routine. So he broke it down into these 6 different areas. And, if his kind of thing is, if you do at least one of these every morning, it'll set you off on a better trajectory. So just imagine if you were to do all of them every morning. And so I kind of adopted that practice. And that is truly my form of self-care. And I find on the mornings where either I wake up late or I'm having one of those days where I'm just like, oh, I don't feel like it, right? Because you're not going to feel like doing stuff every day. Even things you love, you don't feel like doing every day. But you have to be disciplined. You have to be routined to get yourself in those patterns to set yourself up to have, a successful, a positive day. And so the 6 different things are to meditate, which you all mentioned prayer, which is, of course, a form of meditation. Affirmation. So even if you're just telling yourself one affirmation every morning, or, if you dedicate 20, 30 minutes to doing affirmations, whatever works for you. The third thing is visualization, which I find that visualization is a skill that is, for some people, for most people, it is difficult to actually pick up and learn. But it's one of those things where, once you've got it, you got it, and it really works and it sticks. So the kind of basis of visualization, it's more than just kind of picturing a life that you want to see. right? Or imagining like this dream life, or even like a dream day, right? So let's say you have a really busy schedule one day. And talking about self-care, let's say you have this really busy schedule, your, work is back to back, and then you have the kids, and then you have these meetings and Zoom and all this stuff that you have to do, right? But visualization is waking up in the morning, taking that quiet time to yourself, and then literally sitting there and picturing, okay, these are the things I have to do today, and picturing how your day is going to go. But not just picturing how it's going to go, actually sitting with the feelings that you want to go along with what is happening that day. So instead of waking up and telling yourself, man, I have this busy day, like it's going to be back to back, we start telling ourselves things like, I'm not going to have time to eat. Like, when am I going to have time to do X, Y, and Z? Instead of doing that, you sit down with that schedule and you picture it in your head, and you're telling yourself, okay, I have this meeting, I'm going to be really confident. I'm going to speak with clarity, and, I'm going to feel empowered because of X, Y, and Z. So literally, beyond just picturing it, visualization is sitting with those feelings that you want to accompany whatever it is. So whether it's, again, you're visualizing a day, maybe you're visualizing one singular goal, maybe you're visualizing like a lifestyle, whatever it is, the most important part is to incorporate those feelings. Picture yourself smiling, and, smile, picture yourself being happy. Think, oh, I'm going to make my parents or my family or whomever so proud. Well, what does proud feel like? Sit with that feeling. And so that's visualization. And so the fourth part of it is exercise. So somebody mentioned lifting weights, which is great. Morning workouts are amazing. I don't have the time like I used to, but they are great. But you know what I do now, since I don't have time for my full like morning workouts with weights, I do a 10-minute yoga session every morning. Yoga is great, not just because it gets you moving and wakes you up, but then you stretch and you get all those kinks out. You feel a little better about the day. The fifth is reading. Yes, walking the dog does count. It does count. And so I'm in a Facebook group for this miracle morning. For anybody who's interested in learning more about it, for anybody who's interested in learning more about it, or if you want to kind of like get a community or what have you. And so somebody actually posed that question in the Facebook. They're like, oh, I have a dog that I have to walk. Like, how do I fit that into my morning routine? To which I said, oh, I count that as exercise, and I count it as my meditation in the morning, because I get up at 5 a.m. So when I go walk my dog, everybody else is asleep. So it's quiet outside. So that's my meditation time. And, that's just another example of self-care. Instead of saying like, oh, it's so early and I have to be at work in like an hour and a half and I don't have time. It's like, okay, I'm going to combine these two activities, both of which are, part of this morning practice, and I'm going to take the time and really and fully enjoy them. So exercise is one. Again, yoga is great. Walking the dog is great. If you can get into a gym, if you can pick up some weights, whatever it is. But I always tell people when I'm working with clients and I'm telling them about this routine, I'm like, if you get out of bed and do 100 jumping jacks, that's a form of exercise. And the point of it is not, you're not doing this exercise every morning because I want to lose X amount of pounds or gain X amount of pounds. You're doing it because it's going to wake up your body, it's going to wake up your brain and get you moving and feeling more energized and ready to tackle whatever's going on that day. And then the last part of it is silence. I'm sorry, not silence, it's scribing. So writing. I recommend journaling to pretty much everybody I work with. I think journaling is great. What I love about journaling is that it gets whatever's going on in your head out of your head and onto paper. I tell people, you can look up a prompt if you want to, like just Google journal prompts, and there'll be something to help guide you. But even if you just sit there and whatever it is, if there's something, that's causing you any type of like stress, you have something on your mind that you're constantly thinking about and you feel like you can't get it out, just write whatever is coming to your mind, write it down on paper. And you can rip the paper up, you can leave it there, whatever you do with it, I promise you're going to feel better because you're getting those thoughts out of your head. Yeah, so using a planner or a calendar, is a part that falls under self-care as well, because it helps you with that organization. And so, as we said in the intro, like a part of, well, let me back up. So we talked about like being proactive with our self-care. So one of those was having a morning routine, and somebody else brought up boundaries. So let's talk about boundaries. What are boundaries? How do we enforce our boundaries? Just tell me your thoughts on how you define it.
Setting limits on how other people use your resources or what's within your boundaries, like your time, your energy, your knowledge, your skills, your empathy, whatever it is, setting limits on, what people can access from you.
Okay, setting limits on what people can access. I like that. Someone else, how do we define, or how do you define boundaries?
So boundaries can be, like subdivided into different domains, like emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, spiritual boundaries. Like you have that space in each domain that belongs to you and only you.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't let people go over this threshold or that type of a block unless you feel comfortable. If those kind of people who surround you, or your best friend, your family members, and you are confident they don't harm you in that area, if you bring them closer than any other people, maybe that's how I can define boundary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like you use the word threshold, which I really like. In the chat, someone said, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to read what's in the chat. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Someone said perhaps knowing when to walk away from something that doesn't bring you peace. So I would add to that something, someone, some place, some thought, anything that doesn't bring you peace. Monique said, honestly, limiting contact with people after recognizing that the only reason I interact with them is out of guilt or obligation, and not because of joy. Yeah, I like that. And I'm sorry to whoever, like, you're not popping up when you're talking, so I couldn't see who it was, but the person used the word threshold. You also mentioned that boundaries fall into different categories as well, right? So there are physical boundaries, which those, for most of us are fairly easy to enforce. For if someone's too close to you, especially with all the social distancing going on right now, right? If someone's like too close, they're in your personal space, it's pretty easy to tell somebody like, hey, can you back up a little bit? Or, we find it easier or more comfortable to enforce physical boundaries. But for some reason, when we get into that emotional territory, it's a little bit harder, right? So just like people said, if there's someone maybe who's disturbing your peace, or someone who is crossing that threshold of whatever you have defined as being emotionally acceptable to you. I like to define boundaries. A word I like to use, which I really like threshold, I might have to change it up, but I usually use the word bandwidth, right? So just like when you're on a computer and there's not enough space and it says, okay, you've exceeded your bandwidth, that's how I look at boundaries. It's, how much can fit into this space, and at what point do you become overwhelmed or overloaded? And a lot of boundaries, we talk about like these boundaries, physical or emotional, that come from the outside world, but what about boundaries we set for ourselves, right? So a lot of times we talk about people maybe abusing an emotional boundary, and we kind of, I don't want to say place the blame, but there is some fault on that person. But what about when we have boundaries, that we've defined, but we're not voicing them? And so, I mean, I'll give a personal example of that. So
Is that when stress starts to build?
Mm-hmm.
That's when stress really starts to build.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little more about that?
I guess when you're reaching that level where you're not sharing the boundaries and it just starts to build and spill, it spills over. I start to get overwhelmed or really, really stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get this little crick in my neck.
Yeah. So yeah, but a lot of times like stress does express itself physically. And talking about like kind of going into the work I do with racial trauma, in the medical field, a lot of times Black people are at higher rates for certain diseases, and it's not a coincidence. It very much has to do with stress levels and the racial battle fatigue, the PTSD of just being a Black person in America. It'll express itself physically when we don't express ourselves verbally or let our emotions out in other ways. When we're holding it in, it'll express itself physically, because what's happening is your body is trying to tell you, your brain's telling you something is wrong. When somebody abuses your boundary, or when you feel as though a boundary has been crossed in some type of way, your brain knows what's going on. It's going to tell you, this isn't right. And the stress starts, the anxiety, depression, however it's going to manifest itself. But when you don't take whatever precautions you need to, or go through whatever avenues you need to, whether that be going to therapy, whether that be practicing a better self-care routine, whether that be enforcing your boundaries in a more acceptable way, or a way that's better for you, your brain's only going to tell you for so long. And when you start to ignore it, our bodies are amazing things, right? Our bodies and brains, like it's built to protect us at the end of the day. And so when you ignore the mental for so long, now the physical is going to try to tell you, like, hey, you didn't get the message the first time, so maybe you'll get it like this. And that's, the headaches, the stomach aches, the random muscle aches, like you said, the crook in your neck, and you're like, well, why does my back hurt? And now, you're carrying this around and your shoulders are hurting, and you don't even realize that the reason why is because you're stressed. And a lot of times that stress is caused by boundaries being crossed.
I feel like a lot of times Black women, minorities are not empowered to express those feelings, and that people trample boundaries all the time, especially in work situations where you're collecting a check, you're salaried, you're employee. And if you speak up about something, then someone threatens your livelihood. And so we're less likely to speak up about it. And I can't tell you how many jobs I've left, because I just had it. And because my boundaries weren't being respected, or I felt like I couldn't thrive within that position. And it's almost the same thing everywhere. There's like very few healthy places where you can be employed as a Black person. I feel, especially in speech therapy, where it's 93% white, 90% white, whatever the percentage is, it's overwhelming.
Does anybody else kind of share those feelings or have similar experiences?
I can say when I used to work at the time it's called the Board of Education. Now it's called Department of Education. There's so much stress where I saw a lump on the vein of my hand. And when I saw that, I knew that, that was just too much stress. I didn't know whether it was cancer or was it a stress bump. My husband told me it was a stress bump. And then when I decided to go private, within 6 months, that stress bump went away. So a lot is there is a lot of stress that goes on, working in the school system, even working in the college as well. A lot of stress is going on there too. And I think the yoga helps me out with that. Boxing. So yeah.
Yeah. And a good point was brought up, right? Because a lot of times workplaces do cause a significant amount of stress, unfortunately. And then there's this balance of, okay, I want to protect myself, but part of protecting myself is making sure I have income to pay the bills, right? And so you're right that a lot of people feel like they can't express themselves, or they can't speak up, or they can't enforce those boundaries or whatever it is in the workplace. And it's expressing your boundaries in general. It's not something that happens overnight. No matter what age you are, it's a process, and it takes time, and it takes learning, and it takes, some good experiences and some bad experiences. And so in thinking about, let's say we're in, like, this word, is thrown around a lot. Let's say we're in this toxic work environment, right? What can you do for yourself? Because, when I'm working, the focus that I do when I'm working with clients in terms of like counseling, locus of control is a big thing, especially for clients of color. Because a lot of times the issues and the stressors, just like we're talking about, whether it be the workplace or what have you, is connected. It's a systemic thing. And I mean, this country is just set up in a way that minorities always get the short end of the stick. And so, a lot of times we don't have control over whatever it is that's causing us stress, whether it be a workplace or a boss who isn't doing what they need to do, and it kind of trickles down to you. So in thinking of that, what can we do? What do we have control over?
I'd say one thing we do have control over is our reactions. So, despite the stimuli outside in our environment, even when someone is even screaming in our faces, we do have the power to step back and not react, but act instead. So, yeah, that's something that we do have control over.
Yeah. See. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. For me, just someone was to say something to me, for me straight as a professional, I would say to the person, what do you like? What do you mean? What do you mean by calling me that? Can you please explain? Because I need to know why you said that, and then I can tell you how I feel about what you said to me. And that seemed to have helped a lot with a lot of racial discrimination on African American professionals. That was one thing I saw that was helpful for me, to not hold anything in, because holding things in made me anxious, made me stressful, made me angry. And when they're put in that position, they think before they say something else, to hurt a feeling. That's what I experienced. But then there's Monique. Monique said choosing to stay or quit. She also stated reporting to the HR if unprofessional behavior happens.
Right. And, while those are not wrong answers by any means, it plays into the systems that I'm talking about, right? Because you can report to HR, but what do you do if the HR person is racist too?
I don't know. I was thinking cry. I know that's not the answer, but sometimes something can bother you so badly that once you have that good cry, I think I've released it, and now I have to take a time out and see how I'm going to handle what just happened. Like, and that's kind of like the antecedent before going to HR, or like you said, if that's not the case. So sometimes crying is a release instead of, screaming and yelling.
Crying
Can
is
I add something? Do you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes my internet or I don't know is lagging and I have difficulty listening to you or to the speaker at the moment because of those internet issues. So when I've listened to my colleagues, I have only one thing to add. I can say that it's not only racism that is killing the bond that is created between humans. I want to stress out humans, but it's also media who makes things worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think I am in this District 9 as speech therapist. It's my 7th year, actually. I am within the same school with Ms. Brown as my supervisor for 7 years straight. I was born in another country. I moved to the United States more than 18 years ago, and I'm an immigrant. I know all those hassles because sends them myself. So when we hear news that all people are, like discriminating and segregating certain groups of people, that's how I felt when I first started any kind of working environment in the United States after moving to United States. I remember this because I worked in different fields before I decided to be a speech therapist and like go into college, earn my bachelor's, master's, and so forth. So when we hear on the news all the time that people who are who immigrate to our country, that echoes in me because that's who I am and that's what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in District 9 listening to my beautiful students, my wonderful parents, my administration, my colleagues, I don't want to say about skin color, but you can expect that many of them are not white, right? But I feel like I'm more close to them than to some of my white colleagues because they don't know what is the hassle going on at PSMS4 if they were currently in Manhattan in a better community, compared to our community. And I say, listen, you cannot tell this because you never sense it. All you know is because you were listening about it, but you are not living it.
Mm-hmm.
Come to me, be with me for like 24 hours, have that wonderful, like life experience, and then tell me things. But we need to be very, very, how to say it, very sensitive to one more thing. Media is not aiming to bond us.
Mm-hmm.
The media's aim is to separate us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel human relationships that I have developed, as I'm just my own example. I'm not saying it applies to everybody, but I'm willing to speak up now. I don't know why you boosted it right now. I have to say it. I feel we shouldn't be brainwashed. We should
Okay, I think she's frozen on us.
darn.
Well,
Uh,
before she came in, I was going to say, for as far as what we can do for ourselves in terms of, locus of control, I think it's important to, especially in work situations and in this field, to not get into debt so that you're not beholden to work for a check for someone, and that you have options.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a wage slave because you're so in debt, you are in
I'm
bondage.
disconnected back. Yeah, sorry, darling. Please continue. I got disconnected.
Okay.
And sadly, we are in debt.
Yeah.
And
No,
then
I
we
wasn't
are
correcting anyone
beholden to
else.
those places.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so again, that goes back to the system's perspective, right? So that's not, unfortunately, an option for a lot of people, because majority of the country, especially people of color, or immigrants as well, they live paycheck to paycheck. Why is that? Because that's the way this country designed it to be. And the pattern just keeps continuing, so while of course we don't want to be in debt, we don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck, right? We want to have the ability to say, oh, this workplace is not good for my mental health, it's time for me to leave. But unfortunately, for majority of the population, that's not an option. And so and I'll kind of start to wrap up because I don't want to keep y'all all night. But in thinking of the things we can control, is it pronounced, I'm sorry, I didn't even get your name. Gail, it was G something.
Galina, Miss Z, call me Miss Z. Miss Z, and that's fine.
Okay, that's what my kids call me at the school. They call me.
That's it. That's how I make my life easier for everybody. Miss Z, and that's it. No mistakes.
Okay, so Ms. G, you brought up a very good point. And when I talk about what are some of the things we can control, number one, you can control what you're intaking, right? So if you're in a work environment or any type of environment where you feel like you're being faced with just racism, discrimination, you feel like it's a place that's stressing you out, and then you come home, you're in your home, which is supposed to be your sanctuary, your safe haven, your place where you're decompressing, and you turn on the news and it's right,
exactly,
narrative of just negativity and separation and however you want to interpret it. But the news is not meant to make you feel good. It's just not. I'm not saying it's not important to stay informed, but I'm saying it's not, if you watch the 9 o'clock news, the same thing's gonna be on the 10 o'clock news. If you're watching the 7 a.m. news, you don't need to have the alerts on your phone. So that's one of the things we can control. Someone else mentioned something earlier and it slipped my mind. It was the first person that spoke.
Thing I said, how I react.
Reaction, yeah. So reactions are definitely something we can control, right? So a lot of times, unfortunately, when people of color, women of color especially, choose to speak up for themselves, it's interpreted as, oh, she's, the angry Black woman or whatever you want to have it. So, we can choose how we react. So if somebody's, a lot of people will just push you to that point, right? But you want to remember, okay, this is my workplace, this is my livelihood. So as much as I want to curse you out, I'm not going to do it, right? So whether you have to just tell a person, if they're coming at you with something, and you have to just stop them and say, you know what, this is not a good time, or just say like, I can't process this right now, or whatever it is, or can we have this conversation later? Respecting your own boundaries by doing that, doing whatever you need to do, whether it's going to take a walk outside, whether it's calling somebody who is going to like help you calm down, getting yourself to a place where you're not reacting out of emotion, but you're actually thinking things through. And when I say not reacting out of emotion, and I'm not saying that you're going to cool down and then come back to this person and excuse whatever they've done. Like if someone has disrespected you or they've said something that was wrong, by all means, you still speak up. But if you want to do it from a place where you have really thought it out and you've calmed yourself down and you're not reacting out of emotion. So those are some things we can control. Again, going back to just creating some type of routine or pattern or doing something for yourself every day. Whether it's, whatever it is that works for you. If you want to take a bubble bath, if you want to light candles, if you want to work out, if there's like a favorite show you have, but make sure you're making time for yourself every day. Also, if it's good to try to make time for yourself throughout the day. So a lot of times we'll have like our morning routine, or we'll come home and do something at night. Something personally that I do is on my lunch break for 10 minutes, I close the door and I do like a guided meditation on YouTube. And it's kind of my point of like, okay, if I've had not so great of a morning, I can kind of reset. Or if I have had a great morning, I'm resetting anyway, so that if the afternoon throws something crazy at me, I think I'll be able to handle it a little bit better, once I've had that kind of point, that stopping point there. So just thinking about things that we can control. So is there anything else that anybody can think of in terms of something you can do that you have control over?
I do have one more thing, and it kind of goes in part with the reaction, also how I feel within. So like how my mind is thinking. I know that a lot of the times when we're put in a situation, we tend to forget everything that a person has done right. And we only focus on that one thing the person has done wrong. So just like the mind, just like remembering maybe like, you know, maybe this person is not having a not having a good day. And even for our kids, you know, like maybe they're just not having a good day today and they're reacting. And so that's something that I can also control, not to just jump to the wrong conclusion, but to think about, okay, you know, we all have those days. So this person's not evil. It's just happening for now, you know?
Yeah, so not jumping to conclusions. And like Terry mentioned earlier when she was speaking, sometimes it's just simple as asking for clarification, like asking a person, you know, maybe what did you mean by that? Or if you have maybe a child or a kid who's like, okay, something's different about you today. And instead of me being like, okay, they're getting on my nerves, like, and reacting, maybe just taking time to say like, hey, is something going on? Or was there something different that happened at home or what have you? All right. So like I said, I'll go ahead and wrap up because I don't want to keep y'all all night on a weekend. But thank y'all. I'm sorry, weekday, but thank you for having me. I'll leave like my information in the chat. I'm always posting like little helpful tidbits and a lot of information on racial trauma on my Instagram. So I'll leave that as well as my website. And that's all I got.
So